Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. If you are watching live, feel free to comment wherever you're watching from, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, where you're watching from. I'd love to know where you're at. And even if you're watching the recording, I'd love to know where you're watching from. So, for those of you who have never seen me before, my name is Spencer List, and we're going to be talking about layoffs today. So, the music industry has been dealing with this for a few years now, and the industry is changing quite drastically. And so I've had clients who've been laid off, and I've talked to people across the industry for the last few years about their experience. And so about a year ago or so, I wrote a pretty comprehensive layoff guide from a financial planning standpoint. In most cases, when we talk about layoffs or people post about it online, we're mainly encouraging people, and helping them find their next role. And that is, of course, very important, but I'm going to talk about a little bit of financial planning aspects to consider that go beyond just finding your next role. Hey, Joe. I'm so glad you're here. I think, you're on LinkedIn. Awesome. Good to see you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and feel free, for any of you watching live, feel free to comment your questions along the way. And I have them pulled up, so hopefully I will see them and stop and be able to answer them. And then if for whatever reason I don't, I'll definitely check at the end to make sure I answer your questions. And then if any of you are experiencing or have experienced a layoff, I would love to hear your story, talk about it a little bit. And so, I'm going to share my screen and show my guide and just walk through it and hopefully make some sense. There's some financial numbers and things towards the end, and so I can explain those a little bit better. So let's just jump right in. And if you want to follow along, you can just go to motifplanning.com/layoffs. So when one curtain closes, another curtain opens. If you recently lost your music industry job, I'm sorry for your loss. Things will get better. If you're here to prepare for a potential layoff, I hope you never experience one. So it's unfortunately all too common to experience a layoff, especially in the music industry. And it's a tough thing to deal with, tough thing to prepare for. And the reason for this live stream, I wrote this guide over a year ago, and I've been trying to share it as much as possible. But I'm doing this live stream because Warner Music Group recently announced a pretty hefty plan to lay off a lot of their employees. And I know people who work there or who have worked there. So hopefully some of you are watching. And if you know a colleague at Warner or at any company that might be facing layoffs, hopefully they'll find this useful. So we're going to talk about the first steps after a job loss, cash flow considerations, insurance, retirement strategies, and then coordination between jobs. So when you do find your next job. And you can see all the subcategories we're going to be talking about briefly. So the first steps after job loss is to breathe. And let's consider our emotions. So this is a really good graphic from the Financial Transition Institute. Let me just make sure it's on the screen properly. So there are 4 stages of transition. There's anticipation, the ending, the passage, and new normal. So if you are anticipating a layoff, that's not a great feeling, right? You're sort of like waiting, wondering if you're going to be laid off or not. And then the ending is it happens, right? And sort of the day of your last day, what does that look like? The most important part of this transition is the passage state. This is the large, big, hairy part that happens until you find your new normal. And in this case, it might be a new job. But this is a good framework to think through any life changes. The passage state has a lot of possibilities, a lot of positive things that could happen. You could completely change careers. You could get a better job. But there's also fear, chaos, uncertainty, right? And in most cases, when I have clients who've dealt with transitions, whether that's death of a family, moving across the country, whatever transition they're going through, it's usually wise to not make permanent major decisions in the passage state. So if you can prepare beforehand, great, during the anticipation and the ending, and then when your new normal, the passage state is a messy experience in a lot of people's cases. So if you're aware of where you are in the stage of transition, it'll help your decision making along the way. So I think it's really important to understand your emotions in each of these stages and when to make big decisions, depending on what stage you're in. I'm not going to read this word for word. You can read the guide yourself. I'm just going to sort of review some things. So before your last day, review original offer letter. Were there any limitations, contingencies, triggers upon losing your job? Can you talk to clients, or are you just cut off completely? Do they have any language around layoffs? What information can you bring with you? Are you owed anything based on years employed? So understand what is and is not permissible. Look for opportunities. You just never know. It might have been years since you were first hired. So it's good to just take a look and see if anything gets triggered upon termination, because that is different than you quitting, right? Review severance package if offered. Most of the music industry companies have a severance package, which is fantastic. I have some examples here. These are from a while ago, from Riot Games and Spotify when they had their layoffs, but there have been quite a few since then. They're all different. And so you're going to want to review that in detail. And sometimes you can even negotiate some of that stuff. And I linked to, if you're familiar with the Financial Samurai, he wrote extensively on negotiating a severance. And I link it here in the guide. So, depending on your position, your level of experience at the company, you might be able to negotiate your severance, but you want to fully understand how that works. Is it 3 months of pay? When does the payment happen? Are they going to continue to pay for your medical insurance? Because there could be some confusing, I'll talk about this in a little bit, could be confusing of whether you should continue with the company paying your health insurance, or should you do COBRA? There's a lot to coordinate there. So you really want to understand all of the details of the severance package and make sure you're taking advantage of all the options there. Sometimes the severance package will offer some sort of financial coaching or planning. And from my experience, those services are great. I don't know how deep they go with you on your unique situation, so I can't really speak to the value of those programs, but it is nice that sometimes companies do offer some sort of financial support to help guide you through, moving your 401k account, what to do with cash until you find a new job. So I'm not sure how deep they go, but it is something to look into if it is offered, right? Take advantage of whatever you can. Download your pay stubs. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of relevant and important information on those pay stubs. You'll show your total income, the taxes withheld, federal, Social Security, Medicare, state, local, any kind of taxes that you've withheld, and then any contributions you've made to retirement accounts. That information is crucial for later on. So it's good to just have that information, especially if you want to do some tax planning. All this ends up showing up on your final W-2 anyway, but you don't get that until January of the next year. So it's important to have this information. You also want to download all of your retirement statements. So any of these accounts that you have, 401k, 403b, 457, a health savings account, a flexible spending account, that one's a tricky one. I can't remember if I talk about that one in detail, so I might come back to the flexible spending account. That's kind of a weird one if you are laid off. Dependent care, FSA, pension, and stock options. So there's a lot. I do believe I talk about that later in the guide. So with your retirement statements, we're going to be looking at your total balance, your contributions versus company contributions, and how much is vested and yours, traditional versus Roth holdings in your qualified accounts, how are your investments allocated, your pension payout calculation. For any of you with a pension, the payout is determined by usually years of service, and there's usually a calculation that's done for how long you've been there. And if you are laid off, then that calculation sort of ends, and you can kind of determine what your payout would be depending on when you start taking distributions from the pension. And then your exercisable stock options. So your stock option statement will show you what portions are vested, which I believe I talk about later. When you're laid off, some of that stuff might get triggered. Some of it might automatically all vest. Some of it might not at all, and you lose it. So it really depends on your specific situation. And so this information is good because eventually you're going to want to decide what to do with your old retirement accounts. And I actually just wrote a blog yesterday about it, and I'm speaking to the Lone Wolves community tomorrow about that specific topic. So if you haven't joined the Lone Wolves community, it's a great community for music industry executives, and I'm going to be speaking to them tomorrow. So that's July 16th at, I think it's 5 p.m. Eastern. So that's 4:32 p.m. West Coast time. We're going to be talking about that, what to do with old retirement accounts after you're laid off, leave a job, or go solo. But I will talk about that a little bit here in this guide. So transfer and update contact info. So depending on what you're allowed to do, right? Like I mentioned before, you want to keep in touch with your network. If you're allowed to keep in touch with your clients, colleagues, in some cases you might not speak to these people ever again, or you just might not be in touch with them as much. So you want to foster and hold the relationships that you've had, that you value, and talk with those people. Did you set up any personal services through your work email or business, work credit card? So we want to make sure to change usernames, payment information. This one's really easy to forget and not think about. It's so easy sometimes, like if you're just using a work computer, just to use like your company login for stuff. So you're going to want to go through all of that and make sure you switch it back to yourself. Return company property. So if you've got computers, phones, tablets, cars, whatever your company's provided for you, you're going to want to return that property. And also think about, is there property, like I mentioned, if you have a work computer and that's your only computer, do you need to get a new one? There's some things to think about there in terms of planning. And lastly, thank your employer. Leave with gratitude and your head held high. You never know what may come in the future. I've known people who've been laid off from a company and were rehired, right? So we definitely want, even though it may not feel great to experience this, if you can have a positive attitude and with gratitude, that will go a long way for your karma. Okay, so after your last day, we want to file for unemployment right away. So you could do that at the U.S. Department of Labor. There's a guide that I link here on how to do that, and it just depends on what state you're in. And even, I think when I wrote this, I think it was over, but a little bit before that, during COVID, they actually expanded sort of the rules around it. And some of them they continued, some of them they didn't. So it really depends on your situation and where you live. But you're going to want to sign up for that to at least get some cash flow going. Take time for yourself. Remember, you're in the passage state, and it may take time to feel ready to start looking for your next opportunity. So I think I talk about this soon, but the emergency fund really comes into clutch here. The bigger your emergency fund, the more time you can take to, do nothing, or recover, or think about what your next move is, go on a vacation, whatever it might be. So it can be really stressful to be laid off and not have enough cash on hand, and have to take the first thing that comes your way that may or may not be really the best option for you. So if you can, take time for yourself, because you've probably been working very hard, and if you're in the music industry, you're probably overworking and I'm sure experienced a lot of stress in your job, considering our industry. And then when you're ready, update your resume in public databases. So think of all the awesome value you provided at your previous company, express that in your resume. If comfortable, update your LinkedIn and share the news with friends, family, and colleagues. you are likely to receive much needed support and a new curtain may open. So this is more of the kind of the obvious part that everyone mainly focuses on with layoffs and finding a new job. Tap into your network and update your resume. And for those of you who have trouble with your resume, hire a professional. And if you don't want to hire a professional, just make sure you are explaining in your resume the value you provide. I tell people all this time when people want to make more money, you have to provide more value. So phrase everything in your resume of how you provide value. Not, I did this, I completed this task or whatever. What was the value to the company, to your clients, the people you worked with, whoever? Phrase everything in that way and you will be seen as valuable. Okay, so cash flow considerations. So all of these links will link to different tools that I've made that you can go through with instructions. So we want to measure your cash flow. So we want to look at what is your expected income given the layoff and your expenses. So we need to break things up into fixed expenses and flexible. And then you'll also have, the difference between what you have to pay for and what is, variable and discretionary. So make a list of all your fixed expenses that must be paid on a regular basis. So things like rent and mortgage payments, insurance, debt payments, bills and utilities, food, transportation, business expenses. These are the things that you must pay for no matter what, right? There's not really any leeway. And then we want to use our emergency fund for those fixed expenses. So there's another article that I write about how to build an emergency fund with the 4 steps of doing that. So this is something for those of you who are preparing for a layoff or are ever worried about one. The emergency fund will save you so much hassle and allow you to find the perfect job that comes your way instead of having to take the first thing that may or may not be in your best interest. But this is the time to use your emergency fund. This is an emergency. This is not something that you plan for. An emergency fund is not to fix your car. That should be expected that you're going to have to maintain, your belongings. But losing your job is one of the most frequent uses for an emergency fund, among some other things. I won't talk too much about that today. But this is the time to use it. Don't be afraid to get in there and use whatever you need. And hopefully it lasts you as long as you need it. So time horizon, how long do you want to find your next opportunity? How long do you think it will take to find it? And how long do you have financially until you need another job? So you really need to be thinking about this because sort of the clock is ticking, so to speak, and hopefully you've given yourself enough leeway to give yourself ample time to find your right next thing and to give yourself, the space to think about what it is you really want. This is an opportunity, which I'll talk about in a moment. Other income sources. Do you have passive income or other projects providing income? Does your partner or spouse earn income? Do you want to pursue an additional source of income aside from your job? A lot of questions to answer. And then career change or hiatus. So a job layoff may be a blessing in disguise. Maybe you want to change careers or roles within the music industry or maybe time away from the industry altogether. Take this transition as an opportunity to change the direction of your life for the better. I've seen this happen all the time. People who've just never really wanted to take that leap and they sort of get forced to, and it works out where they end up sort of pursuing their true passion or their true calling, whether it's in the music industry or not. And I hear about this all the time. And so you might want to start your own business, right? And maybe this is the kick in the butt to get you to do it. Let me just double check real quick if we got any comments. Kind of have them hidden behind the screen here. I think we're good right now. Feel free to ask your questions. We're going to get more into some financial stuff soon. Okay, I think we're good. Okay. Insurance. Okay, so when you're laid off, that is called a qualifying life event, which allows you, your spouse, or your domestic partner and dependents to make changes to employee benefits. So you can switch over to your significant other's insurance or sign up for independent insurance up to 60 days from your last day of work. So a window of time opens up for you and your partner to change benefits. I just did this with a client. I do this quite often. People have qualifying life events all the time. Having a child, getting married, divorced, death. There's a lot of different life events that are qualifying, that open up the ability to change your benefits. So with health insurance, some different ways. This is for if you don't have a partner with desirable insurance benefits. Here are some options. So of course, what's commonly known as Obamacare, healthcare.gov, the Affordable Care Act is ACA. So you can go there and you put in your expected income. Like I mentioned, that's something that we've already figured out earlier in the steps here. We've got our expected income, and that's going to determine your premium and determine any potential tax credits that might lower your premium depending on your income in the year that you're laid off. COBRA. So this is a program that allows you to continue your previous company's health insurance benefits. And then in the case of a layoff, it'd be 18 months. Depends on the trigger, determines how long you can stay on COBRA. Just understand that in most cases, if your company is paying for part or all of your medical insurance at your company, you can continue with COBRA and continue your medical insurance, but now you are responsible for all of what your company was paying and what you were paying for your medical premiums plus 2%. So it can get quite expensive depending on what plan you were on at work. So there's a lot to consider here of whether you should do this or not. But you should check and see, because there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to continue health benefits and not have a break in them. And then sort of some last some options that I wouldn't recommend first or second is short-term health insurance or Medicaid. And I've got links for each of those in the guide that you can look into those more. Okay, disability insurance. This is by far the most boring, but also the most important aspect of financial planning that most people just completely neglect. 1 in 4 people have the chance to become disabled for some period of time during their career. So disability insurance replaces your income if you are disabled and can no longer earn income from your work. So if you have disability insurance at your company, in most cases, those policies are not portable. You can't bring it with you, okay? Which in most cases means you now do not have disability coverage. If it is portable, then you can start paying the premium instead of your company and keep the policy in force. So I recommend in most cases disability insurance. I'll briefly explain how this works. So if you are disabled, if your company is paying the premium, if you are disabled, the disability benefit that you receive is taxable. If you pay the premium, then the disability benefit you receive is tax-free. And think about it. If you're making $100,000 a year and your disability insurance is 60% of your salary, the difference between that money being taxed or not is either $60,000 tax-free or $60,000 taxed. And if you live in California or New York, you know how low that number will go after taxes, right? So that's a big difference. And the premium is usually pretty low. So that's one thing to consider. So if you have a company policy and it's taxed, then it's likely that your disability benefit is not enough to cover your expenses and needs if you are disabled. And so usually I'll recommend my clients look into independent disability to cover that gap. If you don't have that, then you might want to consider independent disability. If you don't even have disability at your company, you definitely should consider getting independent to cover all of your needs for potential disability. If you're self-employed, it depends on your occupation. It can get a little bit more difficult to get. I won't go too much more into that, but if any of you have questions, feel free and I'll answer them if I see them in the comments. But this is one of the most important things that people overlook. The next one is life insurance. So most employees will offer, kind of the typical $50,000 of group life insurance, but sometimes companies will offer more, like 1 or 2 times salary, sometimes 10 times salary. And in most cases, those go away. Sometimes they're portable, but in most cases, they're not. And then also your company might offer voluntary life insurance policies where you voluntarily decide that you want more life insurance coverage and you pay the premium. In most cases, those are portable, so since you pay the premium, so you can take those with you. But you still might want to consider getting independent life insurance quotes depending on your family needs. Okay, retirement strategies. So this is for 401k, 403b, 457, and simple IRA plans. The employer-sponsored retirement plan funds, those are yours, okay? The company stops matching, and your ability to make changes may be limited when you leave the company, okay? So we want to check your statement to see what you've contributed and what percent or however much of the company contributions have vested, okay? And that should be pretty easy to figure out. Any dollars in your account that's unvested usually gets taken out and is put back into other, in most cases, other employees' plans. So you have 3 options, and again, I'm going to talk about this in greater detail in its own talk with the Lone Wolves tomorrow, but then maybe I'll probably do a public live stream too on it. So you have 3 options. Really, there's 4. Leave funds in your previous employer plan, roll into a rollover IRA, roll it into your new employer plan, and the 4th option is actually to cash it out. So you want to consider the following. What are the plan administration fees? What are the available investment options? And what are the investment fund fees? And I don't have it on here, but the 4th option, cash it out, there's penalties and tax. That's sort of the last resort option. So I get into this in way more detail in my other talk. But there's a lot to think about what you should do with your old retirement plans at work. Now remember, if you have a simple IRA, you have to wait 2 years before you can roll it to a non-simple IRA plan. I'm actually in that window right now too, but I've had other clients in that situation. Okay, vested stock. So you might have RSUs, restricted stock options, ISOs, incentive stock options, NQSOs, non-qualified stock options, or be participating in an employee stock purchase plan. So you may have the option to exercise vested company stock and or take vested stock with you. Consider any tax implications of exercising and or selling vested stock. So all of these are going to be very different, and they're all going to depend on the company plan. And so there should be like an RSU grant letter that you got, and there should also be a summary plan that explains how these stock option plans work. And you'll find in there all the rules around, termination. So there's a lot more than this one little paragraph talks about. It really depends on your situation, but I've seen situations where, you have to sell all your stock, and you don't have a choice, right? Well, that could have some tax implications, right? Or you just lose all of your unvested stock. And that's not fun, but that is sort of part of the agreement that you have in this case. All different kinds of things can happen with this. Can you sell back if it's a private company, are you allowed to sell back your stock options back to the company? So I won't go too far into that unless you have questions about it. So feel free to put those in the comments. Private share for sale. Okay, this is part of what I just said. So there are situations where a private company forces the sale of your vested stock options. Double check your original offer letter and stock option plan documents to see if this applies to you. A forced sale may cause unintended tax consequences. That's so funny. I just said that. It's like I wrote this guide. Deferred compensation, another very complex situation. An amazing opportunity financial planning wise if you have the ability to do deferred compensation. But a layoff in most cases triggers all of your deferred compensation to hit. Likely not what you planned for. So whenever you're making deferred compensation decisions, I have a whole blog and guide about this. But whenever you're deciding these things, you want to consider the risks that are involved, including if you are laid off or leave the company, what happens. So deferred comp is an employee benefit offered to directors and officers and usually highly compensated employees. They allow you to set aside a portion of current salary and or bonus in a non-qualified account that pays out at a later date, and that money grows. It's pretty cool. It allows you to lower your tax liability in high earning years and defer into the future. Deferred comp is paid out in one lump sum or over a period of time. However, a layoff may trigger a payout upon termination. This leads to a large sum of money you were expecting later in life to pay out today. So consider the tax implications and what to do with money. It's funny how I'm somehow able to summarize a very complex situation that will be very unique to you in a very short, in just like 4 sentences. But it's a lot more complicated than that, and so we really just need to be looking at your plan and all the things that you deferred and what happens if you're laid off. And that will be a big part of tax planning. HSA. Okay, hopefully I talk about the FSA. HSA. So contributions to a company-sponsored HSA will end on your last day of work. Your ability to continue contributing relies on your health insurance decision, right? Before we're deciding if you're going to remain on the company plan, if you're switching plans, are you still going to be on a high deductible HSA eligible plan or not? That determines whether you can keep contributing to an HSA. There are some loopholes around that, but that's too much for today. Let's see. That's all I'm going to say for now on HSAs. Dependent care FSA. So contributions require employment with a company that provides this benefit. The loss of your job ends the ability to continue contributing. So same thing. Now the difference is the HSA, you don't have to spend those funds. You can invest them. You can use them for medical expenses. But dependent care FSA, you need to use it or lose it in that year. Meaning you must reimburse yourself for dependent care expenses incurred every year. The typical deadline to reimburse is March after the year of contribution. So I have old dates here, but in March of 2024, your deadline was the deadline for 2023 expenses. Loss of employment shortens the deadline to 30 to 90 days after your last day. You must either reimburse yourself for dependent care expenses or transfer funds to a personal account before this new deadline. Otherwise, the company will keep your contributions and close the account. This one gets people, it's so easy to forget about stuff like this, where you think you have, in this case, until March of next year to reimburse for expenses. But now that you've been laid off, let's say you got laid off, in July, it's going to be August, September, October, depending on your plan. You got to reimburse those expenses or you just lose all that money. Okay. And that's not fun. Okay. IRA contributions. So your ability to deduct traditional IRA contributions is dependent on whether you and your spouse are covered by a retirement plan at work. So you can click the link here to see the table. If you are not covered by a retirement plan at work and your spouse is. So if you are laid off and no longer have the coverage of a retirement plan, that may change your ability to deduct traditional IRA contributions. So it really depends on your situation. And then, if you get a new job, then you are covered in most cases by a retirement plan. So you're just going to be paying attention to that. Other benefits, legal services and discounts. Check the rules and status of any other benefits, including legal services, discounts, or memberships. You may have the option to purchase a continuation if desired. Okay, I'm almost done. Let's see if we've got any questions. I don't think we do. Okay. So coordination between jobs. So we've got the old job here and then the new job. So this is definitely mostly overlooked. One, you don't have that much control over. The other, you do. So first one, you don't have too much control over this, but you do want to be aware of it and make sure that you're filing your taxes properly to make sure that you avoid this issue. So with Social Security, 6.2% of your tax of your income is withheld from your pay stub up to the maximum taxable earnings, which changes every year. When I wrote this, it was $160,200. I think it's higher than that now. Every year it goes up. Your new job will not know how much Social Security tax was withheld at your old job in the same calendar year. So this is a situation where if you're laid off in March and then you get a new job in August, there is a potential for too much Social Security tax to be withheld because your two companies don't talk to each other. Okay. So here's an example where you're employed from the first 6 months and you earned $100,000 and they withheld $6,200 of Social Security. Then you're laid off and you get a new job in August. So for 5 months and you earned $90,000 and Social Security withheld was $5,580. So the total was $11,780. But your total income was $190, which is above the Social Security maximum taxable earnings, which means you were only supposed to have withheld $9,932. That means your company's withheld too much. And this is nothing you can do about it, but you just want to make sure you understand this so that you file your taxes properly and get that money back. In this case, it was in excess of almost $1,900. Okay. The next one you do have control over is your retirement plan contributions. Okay, I thought I saw a comment. Nope, we're good. Okay, retirement contributions are also uncoordinated between jobs. So there is the annual maximum contribution limit to qualified retirement accounts. Over contributing in one calendar year can lead to penalties. Okay, and these are 2023 numbers, but so these numbers are a little bit higher now, but it's good enough for to learn the concepts. So in 2023, your 401k contribution, you did $15,000 at your old job and you did $12,000 in your new job, totaling $27,000. But the maximum that year was $22,500, which means you contributed in excess of $4,500. So we don't want penalties, right? And you also have to take the money out, and the money might have grown, and you have to take out the growth. It's not good. So here's how to avoid it. So we're going to review your last pay stub from the old job to see how much you contributed thus far, right? And in this case, it was $15,000. We know the max is $22,500, so we subtract what you've already contributed. So you've got $7,500 remaining that you can do for the remainder of the year in this example, from August to December. Assume you begin the new job in August with twice a month payments. You divide that number by the remaining number of paychecks. So you've got $7,500 over the next 10 paychecks. That's $750 per paycheck that you could do maximum. If your new employer requires a percent of salary amount instead of a dollar amount, then you calculate your total remaining allowed contribution divided by your expected remaining salary. So we know we can do $7,500 and we know we're going to make $90,000. Okay, so that's 8.33% of salary. We really don't want to go over that because then we're going to have excess. Log into your employee benefits to change your retirement contribution election and reset your desired contribution at the start of your first full calendar year of employment. So in this case, you would be at 8.33% of salary from August to December, but then next January, you need to go back in and reset what you want if you're wanting to do the maximum, okay? Because 8.33% might not get you there. It just depends. And lastly, getting a new job is another qualifying life event. So you can make changes to your benefits, you and your partner. So depending on when that happens, you can make changes again. So you need to meet with your financial planner again and do it all over again. So these are the crucial topics I consider as a financial planner when helping my clients. I hope you found this guide helpful. So feel free to ask any questions. And if you haven't already, if you sign up for my newsletter, I made a new sort of automatic email chain. It's like 5 days or something, but the first one is really cool. It's a 2-page PDF of all of this year's numbers you need to know. So a lot of the numbers I showed you here today, they're old, right? They're from like 2 years ago. All those numbers have changed. I have a document that shows all the updated tax brackets, retirement, maximum contributions. There's all kinds of numbers on there that you need to know. And I update that every year. So that's the first email that goes out right away once you sign up and confirm your email. Also, I give you free access to my financial planning software, send you a bunch of resources. Hopefully it's super valuable. So feel free to sign up for the newsletter. Just make sure to check your spam and confirm your email, or else you won't get anything, and there's no way for me to send you any of that good stuff. So let me check if there's any final questions, and if there aren't, then I'm going to switch the screen up, and I'll be around for a couple minutes. So feel free to ask any questions. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Keep thriving.